Yeah, so I'm Hernández-Durán, and I am technically the professor of art history specializing in Spanish colonial art and architecture. But in addition to Spanish colonial art and architecture, I also teach the history of 19th century Latin American art. I do museum studies. I also have experience curating, so I'm also like affiliated faculty with the museum studies program. So I occasionally teach curatorial seminars, museum studies seminars. I have a secondary specialization in arts of Africa and the African diaspora. I got my master's in African art. That's one of the reasons I was hired, is they wanted me to teach colonial art and then to offer African art courses now and then. So I do teach African art periodically. And then more recently, I've been moving into the Chicano Latinx art history area. We used to have a professor of Chicano art history, and she retired. And when she retired, we lost the line. So we lost the position, which hurt our program. We're known for Art of the Americas here in art history, and Chicano art was a very important part of it. So when we lost that line, it really affected the program. So in the meantime, I stepped up along with one of my colleagues, and we decided for the meantime, we can share a class on Chicano Latinx art. So that's what started moving me into the 20th century and this material, and now I find myself doing all this work in Chicano Latinx art history. Even though I wasn't trained originally to do this kind of work, this is what I'm focusing on at the moment. The origin is tied to what originally was an interest in doing an exhibition of Chicano artists to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Chicano Studies at UNM. This was in 2018. Irene Vasquez, the chair of the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, she's also the director of the Southwest Hispanic Research Institute. She invited me to join her and one of the artists, Francisco Lefebvre, to discuss my interest in working with them on an exhibit to commemorate this anniversary. So at first I was a little wary, because like I said, it's not my area of expertise, but I have curatorial experience, so I was like, let me at least check it out. So we met. And it was actually Francisco's idea. He's the one who came up with the idea to have an exhibition. And they'd already started putting together a preliminary list of artists, most of whom Francisco knew. They were his colleagues when he was in college. They were activists and artists when they were young. So I met with them, and I asked them, can I have some time to think about it? So I went home and I started doing research, and I couldn't find anything written. There was nothing written about Chicana and Chicano artists in New Mexico from this period, the first generation of act. There's material on the movement, but in terms of art history, I could not find anything. So I contacted Irene, and I told her, I was like, well, if we're gonna do this, let's do it right. We have an opportunity here that's rare to do something that will have a more lasting effect. So she was like, what do you have in mind? And as I've said before, I know it's complicating the plan, but I told her we should look at having a formal exhibition in a museum, and we should have a publication. Nothing's written about this. This is an opportunity for us to do research and write something like a catalog. And then of course we'll have programming. The idea for the archive came a little bit later, but as I may have mentioned before, there are actually 4 parts to this monumental project: the exhibition catalog, the calendar of events, which we are working on right now, and then an archive that's going to be housed at the Center for Southwest Research at Zimmerman Library. It's the first archive of its kind. That's going to be ongoing, the archive, as we continue to add to it and build it over the years. So Irene was on board, and I told her this is going to be a lot of work and it's going to cost a lot of money. But she was on board, so this is why it took so long. In terms of challenges, many of the challenges that we faced were based on the fact nothing had been done before. You can't just go online and Google these artists, for instance, or go to the library and do research, because there's nothing. So we had to do everything from the ground up, which meant that we had to visit these artists. And they live across the state, up in Taos, all the way down to Artesia, Santa Fe, Las Vegas, Albuquerque. We had to visit them. We had to kind of look at the list and focus it more. Some artists didn't have any work left. I mean, these are people who were activists circa 1970 when they were college students. So many of them are mature, you know, and they were not professional artists. They didn't hold on to any artwork. So you needed to have art. We're going to have a show, you need to have art. So those artists weren't included because they didn't have any material. Other artists didn't want to be involved. A couple of people had passed away. So we had to come up with a series of criteria. It's like you have to be living in New Mexico, from New Mexico. You have to have artwork. You had to have identified as an activist and be part of the Chicano movement. And one of the things that these artists had in common, most of them, was that they were all students at New Mexico Highlands University. So when I noticed that, I talked to you and I was like, I think that's our focus. Let's focus on 6 of these artists, 3 men, 3 women, who were students. And they were not just students at New Mexico Highlands University, but they worked with the first professor of Chicano studies hired at NMHU, Pedro Rodriguez, who some people know about him, a lot of people don't. I'm hoping he becomes well known because he's an important figure. But he was a man who was from San Antonio, Texas, my hometown, and he was hired at NMHU to be the inaugural director of the new Chicano Studies program. So these students, all from northern New Mexico, you know, they'd learned about European art, Renaissance art, Baroque art. They knew nothing about Mexican art or Latin American art. And he taught Mexican art. He taught them Chicano art, and he sent them down to Mexico City, where they studied with Ramiro Romo Estrada, a Mexican muralist. So they went to the ancient sites, Teotihuacan, and to all these other sites. They went to the museums. They saw the colonial material. And all of a sudden, it's like they were able to relate their homeland to the larger hemispheric history. And they came back to Las Vegas politically activated, you know, and they started painting murals all over the place. You know, so that's the origin of the group of artists, is that they were all students of Pedro Rodriguez. Not all of them have worked as artists. I mean, they had different careers. Journalism, one of them was a journalist, a couple of them were educators. So some of them made art, stopped, they had their careers, raised, and then they came back to art later. A couple of them have been artists the entire time and educators. So they have very different careers. That means that their art production is different. With some of them, there's gaps. With others, it's consistent. Because nothing has been written, that was one of the major challenges, is that we had to invest time and money to drive out to their homes and studios, and then it wasn't like we could tell them, this is what we want. We asked them, pull the artwork you have that you want to show us, and we had to choose from what they had. You know, so we wound up choosing what they showed us, and then we had to kind of make sense of it. Like, okay, what do we have? And this is that was very challenging because I knew I had to interview them because there's nothing else written. So that took time, and then we hired a professional photographer to go with us and to photograph the works once we had selected them. I mean, there's so many moving parts to this. But this is why it took so long. It was very time consuming because we have jobs too that keep us busy. So we had to coordinate with our schedules, with their schedules, with the photographer, make time to go out there. I had to interview them. So the challenges were really just based on the fact that you couldn't just find information. We're like writing the first material on this. But it was also a kind of a blessing in a way. To be able to be sort of starting the conversation. It's been exciting in spite of the challenges. Yeah.
When you first got in touch with the artists, what was their first reaction, or what was their response to you guys' idea?
Well, as I mentioned, this was originally Francisco's idea, Francisco Lefebvre, and they all know each other, of course. They're camaradas, they go all the way back. So he had already mentioned to them. You know, some of them had exhibited some work locally. A couple of them, like Juanita Lavadi, I think the 3 that have been artists all along and have established careers would be Juanita Lavadi, who's the weaver in the group. I found out that she has some of her work at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and she's exhibited nationally. Like, she had works in a show I believe in Chicago, Francisco, the same thing. So a couple of them have been active and have had, careers that take them outside of New Mexico. Some of them had stopped making art, or made art but never really exhibited, or they exhibited in local spaces. So when Francisco came up with his idea, of course, he had talked to them. So when we approached them, they already knew that there was some idea of an exhibit, but they weren't sure what was happening. So when I presented the idea or the proposal to do a big show at a museum, they were excited, you know, and it was really moving to me because these people are talented and they're interesting individuals. And I know one or two of them commented to the effect that no one had ever paid attention to them, and they were so grateful that someone was finally talking about their lives and their work. You know, one of the artists, Roberta Marquez, as I mentioned, I interviewed all of the artists for one of the essays in the catalog, and when I interviewed them, I wrote the essay, and then I shared each section with each artist to make sure that I included what they wanted to include, that I didn't miss anything or get anything wrong. And when she read her section, her response was like, "Did I say that?" She was like, "I sound interesting." And I was like, "Well, you are interesting. They're fascinating people, but they're not used to being in the spotlight, most of them. You know, they're not used to that. And this is very new, I think, to them." But overall, the responses were excitement, and in some cases disbelief that there was interest in their work. You know, so all along we've had the full support of the artists. Without their support, we wouldn't have been able to do this. They opened their homes to us, their studios. They were always amenable when I wanted to reach out to them and like to do interviews. You know, so they've always been supportive and present, which is really what made this project possible. Yeah, well, in terms of like gender or sex, I mean, I felt it would be important to have a balance. This is why it just worked out perfectly. They'll have 3 men and 3 women. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of taken care of just by the fact that these were the artists who were already on the list and had the work and fit all our criteria for inclusion in the show, plus they were all interested. As I mentioned, some artists weren't interested in participating, so the ones that were interested, it just worked out in this kind of balanced configuration. In terms of like race, intersectionality, mestizaje, of course that's a very important conversation, not just in New Mexico, but throughout the Southwest, throughout the Americas, you know, especially after in one of my essays in the catalog is this idea of the tricultural myth, tricultural identity of New Mexico. That you have the native, you have the Spanish, and then you have the Anglo. And I critique it because it oversimplifies very complex histories, and it misrepresents, I think, the nature of the local populations and demographics. Because the indigenous people, when I say it simplifies it, it just lumps all the natives into one group. And we know that there's a lot of diversity among the native groups. They're different culturally and ethnically, and that difference gets elided. So already just speaking before colonialism, when we just talking about the indigenous communities, they're different cultures, they're different groups. So there's diversity already across New Mexico, across the Southwest, across the Americas. And then you have the settlers, and there's this kind of myth of the Spanish conquistador. That really was an invention of the early 20th century. There's no such thing as a monolithic Spaniard. It didn't exist. More recent research, and here I'm thinking about the work of Esteban Rael Galvez, who's New Mexican, who used to be the state historian. He is the executive director of this international project called Native Bound Unbound, which investigates the history of indigenous slavery in the Americas. He published an essay I read where he identified sort of the diversity of the settlers. You know, variety of the settlers was more diverse than most people would think. And even just thinking of those that were from the Iberian Peninsula, the population in Spain is not monolithic. It's divided ethnically and culturally. And he talks about this in this essay, how you have these people from southern Spain versus the Basques versus the Catalans, you know. So even just the people from Spain were diverse, you know. And then you add the indigenous diversity. And then you add the presence of Afro-Latinos. And then he found evidence that there were even people out from outside of Spain, from further east in the Mediterranean, like Greek. You know, so when you kind of look at it more carefully, you begin to see that you have diversity among the indigenous, you have diversity among the cycles of settlers that migrate northward, and then later then you have the U.S. come into the picture, then you have diversity. It becomes more complicated with the people arriving in the 19th century and 20th century. The Chicano artists all come from the New Mexican Hispano population. They come from the local population. And because of its history and the mixture of peoples, there's a lot of cultural exchange. In addition to miscegenation, racial mixing, there's cultural exchange. The settlers that came up here learned from the natives how to build, how to farm. The natives adopted some things that were being introduced. The settlers adopted things that were already here. And through this kind of cross-pollination, you have these interesting negotiations, culturally. And the Chicano artists who came from these populations in New Mexico draw from that in their work. And that's what makes Chicano art in New Mexico different from what we see in California or Texas. It has to do with the unique histories in these regions, the nature of the indigenous populations, the nature of colonialism, which is very different across the Southwest. But the fact that the Chicano artists are drawing from these centuries-old artistic, which we know, we're talking about santos, bultos, ceramics, weaving. We don't see that in other Chicano art production. That's something that makes New Mexican Chicano art unique and talks about this place and its history. Having gone back to the galleries that weren't crowded, so I was actually able to revisit these. I've seen these works a million times in the artists' homes, but to see them in the gallery at the reception, I really didn't have time to experience the installation. So today when I went back to lead the tour, I had some time to walk around, and I need to go back again a couple of times. It's a really big show, and when I was laying it out, there's a story that I want told, and I put a lot of thought to where everything was going to go to lead the visitor through the galleries, and the story unfolds. So there are a lot of things happening in the show, and in terms of your question, what I want people to take out from this is how traditional art, I think there's a perception among many outsiders that people who work in the so-called traditional arts are somehow stuck in the past, or that they're not in conversation with contemporary art. They're just repeating the same things over and over again. The fact that even within tradition, there is change, and many of these artists, as I mentioned, are drawing from traditional New Mexican art, but they're creating an art form that speaks to the contemporary or present setting. Given the civil rights movements that gave rise to the activism they were a part of, that inspired the art, they're drawing from traditional languages, but they're kind of updating them and adapting that. So this traditional art isn't about the past, it's about the present. It is just as relevant today as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. The first thing that comes to mind is the weaving. Juanita Lavadi, who's an amazing weaver, in the 1970s, when she was a student, she experimented with weaving, and there's one work in the gallery called Cultura that has her weavings along the wall that's circular. And she started experimenting, creating these new abstract kinds of forms, using traditional weaving methods, traditional materials, the wool, the dyes, but creating these beautiful circular weavings that are reminiscent of like abstract painting. They're very abstract. So you look at it, it looks contemporary, it looks new, it looks fresh, but it's actually drawing from traditional weaving techniques, but adapting them to these new forms, these new languages, and that's exciting to see. So I really want people to see how these artists are in communication or conversation with their tradition and their history, but also how this work pulls these traditions into the present and really converts them into these tools to communicate ideas. They are part of a conversation, especially in this case, around this whole interest of civil rights and land dispossession. Some of the works are critical, some of them are commentaries. The other thing I want people to take out of this is that the Chicano art is not just something stuck in the 70s. I think there's also a perception that, this is kind of obsolete, it's outdated, that movement, is it really relevant today? But then you think about our political environment today and what's happening, and it strikes me that you look at this movement from the 1960s and 70s, and then you look at today, it's like we're back to square one in many ways. This material is just as important today as it was back then. And I think it's just as important that we continue to see this kind of work being produced, this kind of activism that inspires this work is just as relevant today as it was 50 years ago. You know, the main thing that comes to mind is that we are the ones who determine what's important for us. You know, we should not let institutions, dominant institutions, tell us what is art and what isn't, what is good art, what is bad art, because that's been a criticism lobbied against Chicano art for decades, and why it's been marginalized by, you know, official like arts institutions. The fact that it has usually political content, you know, has been a criticism used against it. There's issues, questions of quality, questions about aesthetics. A lot of Chicano art is seen as lowbrow. In some cases, it's seen as outdated. Like, these politics are from the past; they're not relevant today. You know, so the thing is that we are the ones who determine what of our cultural production is worth preserving and continuing. We should not be letting outsiders tell us what is worthwhile and what isn't. And I think that's one of the issues why New Mexican Chicano art has been left out of the conversation, you know, is that local arts institutions have generally neglected it, in part because of the tricultural myth, as I propose in one of my articles. You think about it, it's Native, Spanish, and like white. Those are the demographics promoted. And if you look at this tricultural myth, and I wrote about this in one of my essays, it develops right around the time, not only when Anglo-Americans are coming west of the Mississippi, but when the first collections are being formed. So they're collecting Native art. They're collecting what they called at the time Mexicano art. You know, and then modern art's introduced, but it's racialized as white. It's the white artists who introduce modernity. You know, the natives and the Mexicans are stuck in the past, producing folk art. You know, it's the Anglos who bring modernity. And so these collections become the foundations for the museums. You know, if you look at the museums, there's museums dedicated to American Indian art. There's museums dedicated to traditional Spanish art or Hispano art, colonial art, whatever you want to call it. And then there's the museums focused on modern art. And then contemporary art's kind of a fourth arm that's a little bit more diverse. But if you look at the markets, this is also when the markets do. There's Indian market, there's Spanish market. You know, the markets, the museums are all shaped by that tricultural concept. So if you think about that tricultural concept, it leaves out certain populations. You know, Native American, you have the native, the indigenous. Then you have the people who are very Spanish identified here. And then you have the modernists who are racialized as white. Where do the Chicanos fit here? You know, the Chicanos, they foreground their indigenous heritage. The native people here are like, no, you're not native. There's like this interesting tension with some of the native groups here where they don't see the Chicanos as native. They're suspicious. You know, they don't quite accept the Chicanos as native. So they don't fit there. And then the people who identify as Spanish are very anti-Chicano usually, you know, because they foreground Spain and their Hispanic heritage. So the Chicanos don't fit there. And then they're not white, and their work's kind of questioned in terms of quality, so they don't fit into the modern or contemporary very much. I mean, it's actually contemporary art, but the contemporary specialists don't really look at it. Where does it fit? If this is the structure that shapes the museums and the collection, where are the Chicanos? Well, they don't fit. What about African Americans? Where do they fit? What about more recent immigrants? Where do they fit? There's so many groups that are part of the fabric of New Mexico that are not, in my opinion, adequately represented because they don't reinforce or represent that tricultural structure, you know, and that's one of the things I write about in one of my essays, you know. So in terms of other communities, I want them to see that we determine what's important, and hopefully other people will see it. You know, so I mean, the origin is the exhibition. I mean, that's the anchor to all of these other projects. As I mentioned, when Irene first mentioned my working with her and Francisco on the show, having curated before, I was like, you know, if you do an exhibition, it'll be great, but once the exhibition comes down, then what, Ike? I was like, we need to have some kind of document, you know, and this is what led me to the catalog, you know, and now when I mentioned, I was like, we have the opportunity to write the first scholarship on this material. and luckily she agreed. So the catalog stands as a document, of the exhibition. The photographer we hired did an amazing job. The catalog's going to be stunning. It's going to be beautiful. Full color photographs of all the works. The 5 essays, I wrote 2 of them. The first one's on the history of the arts culture in New Mexico. This is where I talk about the triculture myth, trying to place where do the Chicano artists fit in the arts culture in New Mexico. The second essay, which I also wrote, that's where I interview the artists. It's on the artists and their work. The third essay, Irene Vasquez, my co-curator, she and one of her PhD students, Howard Griego, co-authored an essay on murals. I mean, murals needed their own essay. And then Sonia Elena Gandert, who is the daughter of New Mexican photographer Miguel Gandert, she just finished her PhD in New York, and she wrote her dissertation on Chicana and Chicana artists in New Mexico and Texas. She just accepted a tenure-track job in Colorado. She's actually coming next week. I'm going to take her to the show on Tuesday after lunch. She wrote a brilliant essay talking about materials and processes that make New Mexican Chicano art unique. So she talks about adobe, she talks about wool, she talks about the woods that are used here, the materials that make this work unique because they're responses to the traditions. And then the final essay was written by a retired professor from UNM, Felipe Gonzalez. He was a professor of sociology, and he's been working on a publication looking at the history of the movimiento here in New Mexico. So we invited him to contribute an essay on the movement. And so those are the 5 essays. We did have a 6th essay that was supposed to contextualize the New Mexican Chicano material with Chicano art history, with Latinx art, with American art, but the author withdrew due to health reasons, so we lost that one. So we have 5 really excellent essays, full color photographs. So I think the catalog is going to stand as a really powerful document of this exhibition. With the exhibition, the next thing is, of course, events. People want to hear from the artists. We want to make sure, this is not about us, this is about the artists. So we want to take every opportunity to give them the opportunity to speak. So you can see their art, but some of the events that we have planned, there are lectures, almost like pláticas, evenings with each artist. Each artist is going to have their own event. And Irene will moderate some, I'll moderate others, and we're going to ask them a few questions to get the conversation started, and then we're going to show images of some of their works and have them just talk about their works. So it's like a conversation with the artists, so people can hear from them and learn about their work and their lives. One of the things I'm excited about is we want to do an entire program around women, Chicanas. One of my colleagues here at UNM, Bernardina Hernández, she's from Albuquerque, Burqueña, no Mexicana, award-winning scholar in the Department of English. She is teaching a course in the fall on Chicana feminisms. So I had this idea, why don't we have Bernadine give a lecture on Chicano feminisms, and then she could moderate a panel discussion with the Chicanas. So that's going to be its own thing. We're going to have another event focused on murals and muralism. We're going to have another event that's on music and poetry. And then we're going to have a book release event. When the catalog comes out in December, we want to do a big book release event. And then there'll be a closing reception. So the program is meant to expand the conversation that's part of the exhibition. And the catalog is the document of this particular exhibition, and hopefully it'll inspire more research. And then the archive, and that's for future researchers, because as I mentioned, my goal is to bring attention to these artists, to their work, to New Mexico, and hopefully other people will want to research and write, because there are other people who could write about these artists and say completely different things than us. But there are also artists in Santa Fe, in Taos, Artesia. They're all over the state. There's so much work that needs to be done. We're hoping this inspires future work. But in order for that to happen, we need to have some kind of archive that researchers can consult. So the archive is like the long-term thing to support future research. I mean, this is kind of overwhelming to me. They're like, it's a hierarchy. To me, the most important opinions, the first ones were the artists. I want them to be happy with the way their work looks. The next group is the larger community, the local community. And then after them are other people outside of the local community, like art historians, curators, other Chicanas, Chicanos, Latinos, Latinas, nationally, and then internationally. As I mentioned a little while ago, kind of jokingly, as a colonial art historian, the artists I normally work with are dead. And they're very quiet and they're very compliant, which I like. So working with living artists was like a learning experience for me. And of course, I was so stressed out because I want the artists to like the show. We're supposed to be featuring, it's about their work and about their lives. And I was like, if they don't like this, the way I did it, the way it looks, it's a failure. So I was nervous at the reception, but all of them were ecstatic. A couple of them pulled me to the side and we went to the gallery that had their work, and one of them was like, I never thought about exhibiting my work like this. This is amazing. It just looks amazing. Thank you so much. People were moved, and there were tears in some cases, because this is why I wanted this material in a museum, because I want these artists to see that they're artists worthy of recognition, and having the stamp of approval from a formal institution like the Hispanic Culture Center, that's very important. It's very different than having it just in a gallery. I wanted them to have the institutional stamp of approval, because this is also what gets attention from other professionals and other museums. That's the way it works. Unfortunately, there's a hierarchy. So the first people I was really concerned about were the artists, and they were all happy. Since the show, it's only been open a week. Today, the reception was just a week ago. It's kind of strange to think about. But at the reception, that's where I started getting the first kind of response. Before the reception, they had staff from the National Hispanic Culture Center walk through the galleries. So the first semi-public response I heard about was from the staff. They have a lot of people working there, and they all came. Most of them were Hispanos. They all came, and Jadira was telling me, and Emily was telling me how everyone loved it. And people seem to really respond to the last gallery that has El Pueblo, the portraits, because these are people from the community. She told me that some of the stuff were like, oh, I know him, I know her, and that was why I put El Pueblo last. Everything was an intentional decision. I wanted that to be the last gallery because I want all visitors to go in there, see these portraits, and realize that it's about them. They are members of this community. This show's about them too. They're part of it. And based on the staff reaction, it was positive. So at first I was like, yes, so far so good. Then at the reception, if you recall, there was so much energy and excitement, and the veteranos, that older generation that was part of the civil rights movement, they'd never seen something like this. I had so many people come up to me, these older New Mexican people come up to me, and they're like, I never thought I'd see this. We have never had something like this before. They were so excited to be recognized, to be given attention, to be given this platform, to share their stories, to celebrate the work they've done. It was very moving to me. And then, of course, today I was finally able to see the comment book. I hadn't seen it before because I hadn't been back. But after I led the tours, Jadira was like, come over here and check this out. Have you seen that? I was like, no, the comment book, I forgot about it. And I was moved. The comments were glowing. And then on top of that, the emails I'm getting from people who haven't even seen the show yet, but just the excitement already. People are curious. People outside of New Mexico are curious to learn about what was happening. What are the New Mexicans doing, during this period? So far, it's been glowing. We always prepare ourselves there's always critics, so I'm preparing myself for the first criticism, but so far, I have not heard one bad thing. It's all been really amazing and positive. Like, some of the artists have a history with the Institute from its early inception. Like, various people have told me, including Francisco, that it was the artist, Francisco Lefebvre, who was one of the people who came up with an idea for an institute like this. So it appears that some of these artists were involved in the early conceptualization of the Institute. Some of these artists have exhibited in the Institute. That's one thing I love about the National Hispanic Cultural Center. They're understaffed, budget's always an issue, but they really work miracles. The shows they have there are amazing and important. And this is why our communities and other communities need to focus on our own cultural production and foreground, feature, highlight the creatives in our own communities, whether they're visual artists or writers. And that's what the Hispanic Cultural Center does. They provide a space, an institutional space that's recognized to focus on artists from our communities. Like their recent exhibition on paño arte, the drawings and paintings on handkerchiefs that comes out of the prisons. No one ever considered that art outside of our communities, but all of a sudden there's a spectacular exhibition. Now people are like, oh, let's look at this. Now they want to look at it. There's interest now in Paño Arte. This is the power that an institution like the Hispanic Cultural Center has as a formal institution and museum, is by including artists and work that is normally ignored, you're really bringing it into the spotlight and getting people's attention. It's on the radar now. One of the reasons we went with the Hispanic Culture Center is just the history that some of the artists have, the work they already do, highlighting members of our community. But it will also have to do with my interest in having an actual museum, not just a gallery. So we had a list of local museums. We knew we wanted to keep it in Albuquerque. So of course it was the Hispanic Culture Center, the Albuquerque Museum, the UNM Art Museum. And I had already tested the waters. I had talked to these museums, they were all interested. But the Hispanic Culture Center was number one. In academia, we call it the right of first refusal. You want to give them the option to either take it or leave it. So we ranked them, and HCC was number one. And when we presented the formal, we drew up an exhibition proposal and submitted to them, reviewed it, they loved it, and they accepted it. So we're very, very happy that they wanted the show, because there's a relationship already between many of these artists and the Institute. Plus, the Institute, the museum has some works by our artists, like 2 of the weavings by Juanita Lavedi are from their collection. And I was really happy that the exhibition provided an opportunity for them to highlight works from their collection. So they're really plugged into this as well. So the NHC just seemed like the obvious choice, given all of these elements, the history with the artists, the work they already do, the fact they already have works by these artists in their collection. So we were elated when they approved the proposal. I immediately started telling everyone. That's when I started promoting it, like 6 years ago. So this has been on people's radar for a very long time now. There were different funding sources. Most of them were UNM related. It was through Chicano Studies. We got some grants through Chicano Studies to support some of the work. The biggest chunks of money were from the city of Albuquerque. We had applied, I think it was initially $15,000 to support like the photography and paying honoraria to the contributors, to the artists. We paid the artists as well. And we went to a council meeting and gave a presentation to the council members, and I was there and spoke, and they were so excited. There was so much interest. This is like 4 or 5 years ago. There was so much interest that they doubled it without us asking. Instead of $15,000, they gave us $30,000. And that was a big chunk of money. So we really thank the Department of Chicano Studies, and then the grants that they were, like the Mellon. There were a couple of funding sources. The Southwest Hispanic Research Institute, the city of Albuquerque. Those are the primary funding sources. Like I said, we had so much, when I mention a community, I really mean it. The fact that the council members unanimously were just 100% behind this project when they first heard about it from us. They really just were just excited about it. We could feel it. So we're hoping to start the first events in June. They'll run through the summer into next fall. Tell everyone about the show, and we're hoping to get the calendar of events out soon. Hopefully it'll be out by the mid to late May, because we have some exciting things planned, and I really want the word to get out. I am so grateful to the staff at the National Hispanic Cultural Center, because I had an idea in my head what I thought the show would look like. But when they finally moved the works to the museum, and then I went a couple of weeks ago to lay everything out where I wanted it, I kind of had an idea what it would look like. They'd already repainted. We chose the colors. We repainted the galleries, or they repainted the galleries. But when I laid it out, I kind of had an idea, but I wasn't sure what it was going to look like, because the text panels weren't ready yet. The labels weren't ready yet. I didn't really see everything up until the reception. I had done a walkthrough in Tuesday, right before the reception, but like 75% of the works were up. No text panels were up. So it was not until the evening of the reception that I saw for the first time everything up. The text panels, the labels, all the works. They had swept and cleaned. And I have to tell you, I was just stunned by how beautiful the show looks. It just all came together. And it was really a team effort. That's one thing I want people to take from this, that one or two of us can't do it. It was really a communal effort. The entire community came together, from the artists to the private collectors to the NHC staff. It's a big team of people that makes this kind of work possible. And so it really is a communal effort, and it really belongs to the community. It's about the community. It's not about me. It's about the artist, and it's about the community. And that's what I want people to kind of take away from this. Is, first of all, the huge amount of work. There's so many moving parts just with the exhibit. There's so many moving parts with the catalog. Getting the five authors, the timelines, the photographer, the photography, then the UNM Press's timeline, trying to orchestrate everything together. Now the events, trying to find the venues, find the dates people are available. I mean, there's so much work that goes into putting this together that I think it's important for people to understand the amount of time and labor that goes into this kind of programming, especially something like this that has so many different elements to it. But it's all done with love, and care, and I hope that comes through. And I want people to come to the show and really kind of absorb and understand the story that's being told here, and to really be able to discern why it continues to be relevant today, especially today more than ever.